Welcome to NuclearCast, the official podcast of the ANWA Deterrence Center. Each week, we bring you leading experts for a lively discussion on topics related to strategic nuclear deterrence. Our host is Dr. Adam Lowther, Director of Strategic Programs at the National Strategic Research Institute. The views of the hosts and the guests are their own.
Welcome back to another great episode of NuclearCast. Of course, I am your host, Adam Lowther, and today we have with us a truly great guest, Wendy Baca. You may know the name. She's been around the DOE Weapons Enterprise for 35 years or more, and she's a very experienced and capable lady who has done, I was reading through her bio because we've only briefly talked in the past, and it was like, wow. She has really done some interesting and cool jobs. And today, she is the program manager for weapons knowledge preservation and transfer at TechSource. And she's trying to make sure that this much younger generation of engineers that's coming in to the weapons complex is learning all of those lessons from the generation that's getting ready to retire. It's a big issue. It's a big problem, big challenge. So with that, Wendy, welcome to NuclearCast.
Thank you, Adam.
So let's start off by talking about this issue of knowledge preservation and transfer. It's not training. It's preserving the knowledge and the experience and the lessons that were learned over, a 70-year period, and then taking all that, experience and knowledge and putting it in the heads of a generation of engineers and physicists and chemists that are very, very different from those who preceded them. How are you trying to make that happen? What are the challenges you're facing? How is it going so far?
So it's going well. The starting point is we realize there is no college degree in nuclear weapons acquisition or program management. So you can't hire anybody straight out of college, straight off the street. And so the program already, even when I started way back in 1987, I went in and followed a senior engineer around, and it was an accepted process. So we want to make sure that we have a version of that system in place that hits a larger group of people, which is why we do the knowledge preservation effort that TechSource runs, to bring in students, so 15 to 20 people in the room, and we give them sort of a fast-paced training, but we don't like to call it training, as we just said, but going through the existing regulations, but also adding in anecdotes and stories and true things that can actually occur so that this new generation can prepare themselves that it's not all going to be perfect, and there will be some bumps in the road, and it's just a question of managing them.
So is there a specific, for me as a college professor and somebody who's been in the education business for a long time, is there a specific approach that you're using both for the preservation? I've seen a lot of remastered, for example, test videos. Some of the old videos have all been remastered. We've seen a lot of sort of efforts to preserve this historical archive. When it comes to preserving and then transferring knowledge, do you have some specific techniques that you're using? Is it just good old fashioned OJT? What is it?
The first thing we do is, depending on the subject matter, and we have 10 different modules that we teach, and it's divided among the weapons acquisition process. Depending on the subject matter, we are able to still find a few people in the system that have actually done that work. And so those are our subject matter experts, and they come in and teach those modules. So if it's something that I didn't work directly in, and I had a great career and touched on most everything, so that's why I have such passion. I'm really glad to be here for TechSource. But I'll make sure that the subject matter expert that can give those stories and to talk about how this worked with the DoD or how this worked with the other government offices or that type of thing. And here's an example that we've hired them. And it's kind of an interesting time to hire people that are thinking of retiring. They're done working, they don't want to do this anymore. But it's working well because there's so much passion in the system. And I'm happy to say at least I established a network, and people will know me when I call and ask if they're willing, and they're always willing. We rarely have somebody that says, no, I want to retire and get a sailboat and be gone. So that's our main way to do it right now. And then we're going to keep building and building. So we need a succession plan, because things we've done will become completely obsolete in terms of what they currently do. And so that's what we've been working on. So it's a little bit, not real formal, but it's definitely working. We got over 30 people in the group of subject matter experts.
Well, let me ask you from, you sort of came into the business near the end of the Cold War, and then you saw the drawdown, and then you've seen the effort to modernize. And for you, as you were an industrial engineer and focused on program management, acquisition, I wonder, from that, 4 decades, have you seen the bureaucratic process get better, worse, faster, slower, more cumbersome, less cumbersome? How is that going, such that if, for example, we have another sort of Manhattan moment where because of Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, we have to dramatically expand the arsenal? I wonder, would we be able to do it, or are the wheels so slow and so cumbersome that we could never do the Manhattan Project again?
So, I would say that the foundation is still there. It will require, a version of what they did in the Manhattan Project. They got a certain group of people in there rolling up their sleeves, late at night. And we may need to do that initially to get everyone to transition out of some of the things that have come into the system for various reasons that might have grown a little bit in the system. We had an original acquisition process that the stockpile was built upon, and in response to inquiries and some of our performance, perceived issues in the past, we've added a few tools on there that may or may not be as beneficial. So it would take a group of people, kind of a task force, to come in and recommend to the management that, hey, let's back off on that because it's actually hasn't done us as much good, and we need to, get back to some of the original program management efforts. And I think that would go over well, and I think we could accomplish it. It would just be, again, very similar to the Manhattan Project. I was talking to somebody the other day that we would do a mini Manhattan Project where you get that small group of people that's tasked with making things happen.
I wonder if, like, one of the big challenges is you think of all the sort of the science labs and then the production labs, and they've all changed their names to be something other than purely nuclear weapons.
Right.
Kansas City is, because there was not a future for nuclear weapons there for a while. So therefore, if we as a lab, we're going to survive, we're going to be a national security lab. We're not going to be a weapons lab. Mm-hmm. So I wonder, with these sort of transitions, can labs sort of, transition out of nukes into national security and then go back? Can they make these pretty significant swings in periods of what have historically been unstable budgets, difficult programs, like the politics that labs have to deal with because of the nature of nuclear weapons? They don't go out and advocate for their programs. They're pretty careful and pretty quiet, just because, you've got so many disarmament groups out there trying to kill the mission off. I wonder, how does all of that play in terms of making it feasible for the labs to, plus up and grow as the strategic environment signals that, hey, we need to do more.
Yeah, I think that the foundation, we were able to keep the foundation. Stockpile Stewardship Program was what Congress agreed that the deterrent still needs to exist, even though we dismantled many weapons during that drawdown. So the foundation is there. Some of the people did move over to, things I observed, solar, satellites, things, but they stayed at the lab, and all of the labs. And so the labs still have the ability, I think, to bring some of those people back in. When the life extension programs were starting to pick up, a lot of those people did come back and, brought some of their experiences with them. But I do think that we will be able to rebuild that foundation that we were able to keep. And, the political environment did affect that as time went by. And, people thought we were going to be able to be a world without nuclear weapons. And we're seeing lately that, that may not be the case. And the United States is going back to, let's determine what we need to do for the future here in the deterrent. And so if we had shut down many capabilities or many facilities and didn't keep shadows of some of those capabilities, I would say that it would be much more difficult. But I think we were able to keep some of that. And I've over the past we've reestablished capabilities, and it's tough, but it's fun, and you get the right people in there, and it's a accomplishment.
Yeah, so I think we could probably agree that pit manufacturing has sort of been one of these issues that's received a lot of attention.
Yeah.
And can we get it done? Can we not get it done? There are problems. Is this challenge for pit manufacturing one of human capital or one of infrastructure?
So let's see, human capital for sure. And I'm sorry, there's a phone ringing. Is it tying in? No, I hope not. Human capital is definitely an issue. And so we're using the knowledge preservation and transfer, giving that training to both sites that have the pit mission that you've read about in the news. And then the facilities for any big rates, we would have to make sure we had all the plans in place and activities ongoing to make sure those two facilities are up and running and can support, the rates that they're talking about. The one thing too is we have discussed the rates of pit production, and we talk about this quite a bit. Is the joint program with our DoD customer and the delivery platform. Sometimes we need to get the pit capability up and running and established again, so that we can respond like we used to. Safely through all regulations. But we also need to make sure we're tied to our DoD partners and we're not too offset from the schedule. So I think it's just a question of communication and teaming.
Now, as you work across the DOE's lab infrastructure on preservation of knowledge, as you look at it, because you're an experienced program manager, do you see writ large the bigger challenge is with human capital, or is it with, because we hear frequently we need, new facilities because these are original Manhattan Project facilities. And we've talked about the aging workforce. That's been a big topic. How do you see that balance between the human capital and the infrastructure?
So it's definitely a tight balance, and the infrastructure is ongoing, and I think there are some streamlining things that we would need to consider to get those facilities ready at the same time to support the schedules that we currently have. The other thing too, and this is blasphemy, but sometimes just a small adjustment to the schedule, but still delivering, still gets the job done. And I experienced that even during, towards the end of the Cold War and making things happen. As long as we're demonstrating we can get some sort of rate and establish that production and stable production, then expanding that can happen in a year, in 2 years, and we're still meeting what the country needs for supplying to the deterrent and the DoD partners. So but the human capital is where we really, because you like I said, you can't get a college degree in nuclear weapons and knowledge that way. And so having that, junior, senior type development with new engineers coming along and new designers and new physicists to make sure they understand all the idiosyncrasies of weapons production is going to be very important. And then we can work on those.
Now,
yeah.
So we're at that time of the show where we have to take a quick break. And when we come back, I want to do a little knowledge preservation here on NucleCast. And I want to ask you, as an experienced program manager, as you look back over 40 years, how has the evolution of program management and weapons acquisition changed? And has it changed for the better or for the worse, and why?
Okay.
So you're listening to NucleCast. We're talking to Wendy Baca, and we'll be right back. This episode of NucleCast is brought to you by the AMLA Deterrence Center, whose mission is to educate Americans about the nuclear enterprise and strategic deterrence. And we're back, and Wendy, I posed a knowledge preservation question for you, so I'm going to turn it over to you.
So let's see. The evolution is that you almost can't compare between the way it used to be done and now, and there's several root causes for that. Funding was a different situation, and so if we were to try to be successful again, I'd recommend we get back to some of that original funding. We used to have a direct and indirect budget pretty much in the weapons program, just two places, and now there are a lot of different stovepipes. Congress needed some visibility into the way the money was going. And I think we could still show that, but get it back into sort of a more efficient way of managing the budget. And so there's that. And then the program management of just meeting with the labs and plants and the sites. There's been some confusion, and we need to reestablish the roles and responsibilities so that the federal program manager's role is very clear, and there's no maybe crossing the lines of the federal acquisition regulation and our M&O contractor situation that we have. The DOE is the only entity that has M&O contractors, so government-owned contractor organizations. That's a great thing, and we've evolved a little bit to more like maybe some of the DOD 5000 is their regulation, where it's contractor-owned contractor organizations, and we would need to make more efficient and get back to that M&O contractor situation. Not that we've gotten away from it, but just to reiterate those roles and responsibilities of the design agency and the production agency and the role of the federal program manager. And again, the facilities are going to be important to get the rates up, because we have facilities today and we could, function at lower rates, which is kind of how the Manhattan Project started. They didn't have all those facilities at those rates ready to rock when that all happened. And so we would actually have to get back to something out of an understanding that it's going to take some time and just offer up efficiencies for ways of getting the job done. And I think we can get there as a team. It's got to be a team.
Yeah, I looked at, it's probably 4 years ago, I did a study on acquisition reform. And, I just went out to go see what had previously been done. And what I found was that over the 10 years prior to me looking at it, there had been 165 acquisition reform studies. So we already knew everything we needed to know about how to reform the acquisition system. But what we found was that, when we have these major acquisition reforms every 5 to 10 years, they sort of are a little bit more efficient to begin with, and then that efficiency falls off, and then they're as bad or worse than they were before. And we never really make the programs and the program acquisition any better. And I almost think it's, there's the very famous example of Darlene Drurian in the Air Force, and where, she was a program manager, and she gave a contract to Boeing or somebody, and then she left and went and got, I think, herself and her son hired by Boeing.
Oh, gosh.
And then to prevent what was essentially, a few $1 million of corruption, you put in $1 billion process. You prevent the million by spending $1 billion.
Right.
And so I wonder if, are we, because just my experience with DOE is far more challenging than DOD in terms of trying to get things done. And it's just, there's a lot more process to go through. Has there been sort of an effort to trim and cut and create efficiencies, or is it just because of the nature of what we're dealing with that we want all of that so that we can say, hey, we were really, really careful?
Yeah.
What is it?
I think we've had some well-intended people that have come in that, again, didn't, I'll say, work their way up through the trench and thought that, and there's a lot of reactive, if Congress has a question, we're kind of like, okay, they have concerns with us compared to the Cold War, which was a blank check in the national security mission, and we were just tearing down roadblocks, and maybe sort of a not so kind way. But I think if we could realize that we need to, kind of like you're saying, Adam, we've added things on there and we haven't figured out why we're doing what we're doing. We're just reacting. But if we sat down and said, okay, here, what do we need to increase these rates and to do this? Because we need to articulate what needs to be removed, what things really are just being, making us inefficient and maybe disorganized, and get rid of them. And to take that chance and to not say, well, it's in congressional language. We would have to go meet with Congress and say, if we want to get these rates done, if we want to get these buildings built, we've identified these, inefficiencies in our system that have evolved over the years, and now we need to remove those and give the rationale as to why it will be okay to remove some of those added things. But it's all a process. We can't just do it in a vacuum and stop doing things. And we need, to be able to check it out on the side and not be doing it by the program, which is what's happened a lot. And that never helps you, because then you never do the same thing twice and then you don't have the stability.
As you deal with younger lab folks, engineers, physicists, do you see a return to the nuclear mission, sort of a refocusing on the nuclear mission across the lab, just that sense of this is our purpose? And do you see an excitement about it?
So,
and then
yeah, I'm sorry.
Let me ask a third question. Do you see, historically we could get the best, and now you're competing with, tech firms that can pay a lot more. And so, whereas that didn't really exist in the past. And so now you've got this, just so many different options for really good engineers to choose.
True.
Do you see that we're getting the best? Or, so I've 3-part question.
So let's see. I would say that I do see some excitement, and not to put a shameless plug in, but after we do one of our knowledge preservation classes, we do a critique and ask, did you get a lot out of this class? Not what did you learn, but what did you get out of it? And there's a lot of excitement in those critiques, and so I see that, but maybe not so much beforehand. So they need to know that it isn't actually an exciting job. Now we're we're up against a really tough thing because the big firms pay a lot of money, and we're a government entity, and so we can't offer that right off the bat. And so it's got to be the reward of the job. It's got to be the desire to help the country, maintain the deterrent. And sometimes they just need to hear that. And then they're like, "You're right." I used to joke with some of my staff. You're going to take a trip to Amarillo or Kansas City, and you're the only W-78 program engineer on that plane. There's probably more than one computer programmer, probably more than one doctor, nurse, but you're the only one in the world. And that kind of thing really really does help in this kind of competitive environment that the world has. The other thing too is quality of life. So you will get a good quality of life even when we're busy working. The quality of life compared to things we've heard, and I do have some data of a colleague that was he was doing a internship at Sandia, and then found another internship with one of the, I'll just say, other companies that hire people and pay a lot. And a person came back right away and said, I like the quality of life that I had at Sandia. Maybe the money was good, but I want to be there. And to me, the mission is, cinches it for me. But we're competing with, why are these kids can't bring their cell phones in? And, they get tired of not being able to text. And it's like, well, what are they doing on their phone anyway? I mean, we sort of joke. So
Yeah.
it is that mission and that excitement. And that is why I am happy to be doing the knowledge preservation, because there's nothing more fun than to see somebody waiting on their clearance. And so they'll come into our class, which is unclassified, and really get a smile on their face when we've told a story about, some crazy little thing that happened. One-time deal, because it's so unique.
Yeah. And I can imagine that for, young engineers, for me as somebody who spent my career on the DOD side working, the nuclear arsenal and operations, I wonder for these new folks who probably don't have that much of a background in, let's say, testing, design, for them to actually get to see the old videos and to hear from, the designers, and that probably does breed a strong sense of, this is kind of cool.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, with the way the world kind of has become, there's a little bit of despair of, those were the good old days. But we need to make sure that we're portraying it correctly, that, it can still happen again. The Nevada nuclear security site is still there. And, sorry, I'm borrowing a room, and I think they're going to need it here soon, but I know, and I was out there recently, and there's, just the scenery out there and the history out there, and there were some younger people on that trip doing this work that we were doing. And they were like, this is the coolest place in the world, Joshua trees and everything. And it's just an excitement that as long as we're out there and having a good time, it's contagious. And so that's what I love to do with the younger people, and it's working.
Well, now as we get close to the end of the show, I oftentimes pull out my magic lamp, and I want to let you make 3 wishes from my genie, Bob. And so if you can have those 3 wishes, Bob will grant them. What would those 3 wishes be in regards to what you'd like to see out of this knowledge transfer and this effort to maintain and build a more efficient and effective nuclear enterprise?
Let's see. First wish would be, that I continue to be able to find good subject matter experts that can also tell a good story. We want to excite these kids, so we don't want to go in there with drudgery. So that may be a minor wish, but it's going to pay dividends. And so that means that I need to be able to get with people that have been in the system. And of course, we have a lot of word of mouth across our 30 people, that they'll find somebody and we'll bring them in, and it's always a good thing. So that's wish number 1. Wish number 2 is, when the time does come that we need to examine what we need to remove, figure out if there's anything we need to add, but for sure things that we need to remove, that there's a following to go ahead and pursue that, because it will take upper management and the government working with Congress and that type of thing. And we don't want to just say, oh, we're stuck with it. I mean, it came down 10 years ago, and this is what we've got. So that's my second wish, is just to be able to impart, the importance of this, and to be understood that we need to make some changes. And then my third wish is, and of course I won't ask for 3 more wishes, but is just making sure that people understand the mission, and that there's not there's a lot of negativity in the whole world, but there's just more positive understanding that this mission is there and decided by the government, and that it's all worth it in the end. And it's if you get on the soapbox of the Manhattan Project, and yes, there's good and bad there, for sure, but if the government and the country decides we need this deterrent to be improved, then we all get in there and rally together.
All right, Wendy Baca, thanks for joining us on NucleCast.
Thank you, Adam. Take care.
Yeah, and thanks to you, the listeners, and we'll see you on the next episode.
Bye-bye.
Well, I'm glad to see that Wendy and her team are trying to preserve all of that knowledge, because that's one of the big challenges. And it's not only the knowledge that we're trying to preserve, because we've already lost many of the companies, that, for example, built some of the key components that are in, Minuteman III, for example. And so, we're, trying to come up with alternatives. And so knowledge is also sort of similar to, the widgets that we need for our weapons, in that preserving that knowledge, transferring that knowledge, and then in that process, getting young engineers and designers excited. That to me is part of what I was really glad to see, because, you can win or lose based on the morale of the troops. And so, the lab folks need to have good morale, and I'm glad to see that Wendy was working it.
This has been a production of the ANWA Deterrence Center. Our executive producer is Kimberly Charrington, and this episode has been engineered and mixed by David Krumthal. Follow the show on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter at NucleCast. Listen, follow, and review the show on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts.